Well, good afternoon, everybody, and thanks for joining us today. For those of you that I haven't had the chance yet to meet, either virtually or in person, my name's Todd Gilchrist. I'm the Vice President of University Services, Operations, and Finance. For the space management policy work, I'm also pleased to be the executive sponsor for that work. I'm joined today by Ashley Badia, our Associate Vice President of Infrastructure Planning, Development, and Partnerships, and several members from Ashley's team. And on behalf of the team, we'd like to welcome you to today's Space Management Policy Town Hall. Before we begin, we open today's Town Hall with a territorial acknowledgement. University of Alberta acknowledges that we are located on Treaty 6 territory and respects the histories, languages, and cultures of First Nations, Métis, Inuit, and all First Peoples of Canada, whose presence continues to enrich our vibrant community. I'll just get a few housekeeping things dealt with here this morning. I know we've been doing this for a long time on virtual, but just a reminder, I do encourage you to keep your cameras on for the town hall. It's always nice to be able to see people's faces. However, we'll note that the town hall is being recorded, so do feel free to turn your camera off if you're more comfortable with that. A link to the recording of today's session will be posted on the Space Management Policy webpage after it's ready following today's session. Please do keep your microphone muted for the duration of the presentation, just keeps the background noise down. To ask a question during the discussion period after the relatively short presentation that the team will give, please do use your action bar at the bottom of your screen in Zoom. You'll be able to find your raise hand icon. I'll moderate today's Q&A and I'll call upon you in order to ask your question. If you're more comfortable typing it into the chat, please feel free to do that as well, and I'll watch the chat and we'll bring things forward. Before we get to meet the team that'll be managing today's session and the review process overall, we'll just take a quick look at the agenda. We're going to kick off our consultation process with today's town hall and want to begin by providing you with an overview of the space management policy. We're going to include some information on key elements and principles that will be addressed in the revised policy. We'll talk about the need to revise the policy, why now, what does it mean for you, and how it connects to the university's strategic landscape and the One University model. And finally, we'll talk about the policy development process and the timelines that we're working to. We will be happy to answer any and all questions that you might have after the presentation, but we'll get started here with the presentation, and Ashley, I'll turn things over to you for now.
Thanks, Todd. As Todd mentioned, I'm Ashley Batia, Associate VP of Infrastructure Planning, Development, and Partnerships, and I'm project sponsor for this initiative. I have a few members of my team here to capture input and help us answer any questions. I'm just going to maybe have them give a wave. So we've got Joanne Bortnick, Director of Strategic Infrastructure Planning and Partnerships, Jacqueline McLeod, Head of Strategic Infrastructure Planning, Anthea Lakis and Kyle Watu, Strategic Infrastructure Planners, and Azel Calders, Strategic Infrastructure Coordinator. Marvin Washington is also joining us this afternoon. He's College Dean of the College of Social Sciences and Humanities. He's joining us for information as he's working with me as a co-sponsor on a different but related initiative called Built for Purpose, the University's Strategic Campus Plan, that you'll see mentioned in a couple of the slides. It's in consultation now as well, and there's going to be town halls on that at the end of October. Next slide, please. Thank you. So the purpose of the policy. So university space is a shareable resource, encompasses buildings, lands, and infrastructure. Effective management of space allows us to meet the needs of the university community and progress our core mission. The space management policy defines university space and outlines responsibilities and accountabilities for space management and administration across the university, as well as establishing principles that align with the strategic priorities. The policy is intended to create the foundation for a consistent, transparent, and equitable approach to space management, including how we make decisions around space that are going to support continued growth and sustainability. Why now? Why are we updating the policy now? So with the introduction of the one university operating model, the college model, and the vision set out by SHAPE, there's both an opportunity and a need to shift our approach and clarify roles and responsibilities and decision-making authority related to space. So we know we have greater opportunities for greater consistency and improved sustainability for how space is allocated and how we use our infrastructure resources across the university. SHAPE sets that vision, bold vision to increase enrollment to 60,000 students by 2033. Integrated enrollment growth planning emphasizes the need for a coordinated and strategic approach, including how our physical spaces can accommodate expansion of this scale. So during our initial review of the current space management policy and the related policies and procedures, several key areas of space management were identified, some of which are addressed in the existing policy suite. Others are addressed in standalone policies. So we really see an opportunity to integrate several policies into the revised space management policy and really look at creating a more streamlined, holistic approach for the U of A. So we've been working on this diagram a bit just because of the complexity around space and where the strategic guidance is coming from to really just help people understand how this fits into some of our other documents that we have. So the revised policy is a key component of our overall planning landscape. So it's connecting to our institutional and campus strategic plan, so what we build and our planning tools of how we build things. So we've got the alignment with the U of A mission at the top. So that's the complement to strategic plans, including our integrated asset management strategy, or IAMS, which was refreshed in last February and released. And then the new built for purpose university strategic campus plan, which I mentioned is also under consultation with town halls happening for that at the end of October. So together, the strategic plans provide the foundation for effective infrastructure management. They'll support the teaching, learning, and research priorities of the institution through targeted investments where it's needed to support growth. Drawing from our strategic plans, the space management policy principles will drive the creation of welcoming, safe, engaging, and innovative spaces. So this is about supporting our commitment to create environments that progress the goals of our strategic plans and enhance the student experience on campus. So we're working on a number of fronts to align our framework and streamlined approach. As I mentioned, that space management policy is a foundational step to guide our work and update our planning tools. So at the very bottom, you see some of the tools that actually develop as we move to implementation. So that's college level master plans, general and functional space programs, and space standards. So that gets into the how we build things and specific projects that people get to see happen. So I'd like to give a brief description of some of those just in terms of how they relate to each other and response to some of the questions that we had at the town hall on Tuesday. So at the highest level, when we think about college level master planning or faculty master plans, it's really charting a path forward by projecting space needs based on projected growth and strategic priorities of the college's standalone faculties or administrative portfolios. They identify high-level infrastructure, redevelopment, and renewal scenarios of what that could look like on campus. This in turn feeds into more detailed faculty space planning. When we look at space standards, that's about giving us clear guidance for renovations or new buildings for space sizes, such as various office sizes, as well as guiding design considerations that enhance accessibility. They're also used as inputs to space formulas that enable us to generate approximate space areas for specific categories of space. So I mentioned offices, but also classrooms or study space. While they describe a preferred state for space as part of that formula, they remain flexible to the realities and physical constraints of existing buildings, specific program needs, and changing trends in pedagogy, technology, workplace activities, research practices. Next slide. Okay, thanks. So in terms of key topics, the first three key areas relate to the one university model. So those are around space management principles, scope and application of the policy, and authority, roles, and responsibilities. The principles and scope are intended to guide decision-making and align with our growth objectives outlined in SHAPE and support integrated enrollment growth planning. We'll expand more on principles later in the presentation. The authority, roles, and responsibilities are to be reviewed, ensure they align with the college model and give us a foundation for space-related decision-making that's timely, fair, consultative, and transparent. The last 3 areas of the policy are primarily around changes to space, so acquisition and disposition of space, modifications to space, and use of space. So these are currently addressed in other policies as part of the related pieces that we're looking to consider pulling together. So to provide an example of those, the planning and renovation policy as part of space management, it guides how the university evaluates and delivers on requests to make changes to a space. When we look at renovating space, we want to ensure that the changes are based on demonstrated need. They promote best use of space to ensure functionality and efficiency and future flexibility for growth. A different policy, facilities, floor, and room numbering policy is also a component of space management. That one's about supporting wayfinding through consistent and standardized floor and room numbering. So as part of this review, we're considering integration of these policies into a revised space management policy and shifting process-related items to the appropriate procedures just to give us that more streamlined approach. Next slide, thank you. So what's not in the policy? So we recognize many of you may have questions about how the policy affects you. Well, the policy provides overarching guidance and framework and authority accountability structure to implement space management principles. It won't consider specific questions around, what's the process for requesting a different lab? What type of space would I be assigned as an individual? How big would my workstation be? The processes and methods for managing space, in other words, how space is allocated to departments and individuals will be addressed in the space management procedure. However, decisions around space assignment, so individual office assignment questions would remain with unit heads. So principles. So adherence to established set of principles is fundamental to ensuring our approach aligns with the strategic goals of the institution. We're aiming to leverage opportunities for optimized space use, align for growth and impact, and improving financial and environmental sustainability. So not only will these principles be applied to space management, they'd also help inform some of those other pieces that were lower down in that inverted pyramid we talked about, so guiding campus planning and specific projects. Our goal is to be more responsive and adaptable to the evolving needs of the university. So through consultation, we aim to define space management principles and promotes shared stewardship, inclusivity, interdisciplinarity, and equitable space distribution. Decision-making needs to be consultative, collaborative, and transparent. In terms of the policy development process, so we're at that consultation phase. So we need to make sure that we're seeking input and feedback through a number of consultation activities. So today's town hall is the start of this process. Well, it's the second town hall that we're doing, followed by a series of roundtable discussions on specific topic areas related to the space management policy. Input gathered from the consultation is going to be used to inform a revised draft policy, as well as a what we heard document that's going to be shared with the university community through the space management policy website. The draft policy will proceed through governance for review this spring. Following any edits, it'll be submitted to governance for recommendation and board approval in the fall.
Excellent. Thanks, Ashley, for walking us through that. And I'll just stress or emphasize, I guess, the work that Ashley did there to try to put into context for us that inverted pyramid type diagram to just help us understand where the topic today, the space policy, fits within the larger ecosystem of what is our infrastructure is hopefully helpful to participants today. Of course, we will endeavor to answer any questions that you have, but our primary focus today is around the space management policy. So thanks for that, Ashley. We would now like to open things up for questions. As you're thinking about what questions you might want to ask us, we've just put a few things on the screen here to provide some examples that we'll be asking, throughout the consultation process overall. And I see John has put his hand up already. Thanks, John. We did receive a question from John in email in advance, and so appreciate that, John. We're going to let you kick us off today. So over to you, please.
Thanks. You had a slide on it. So I'm the Director of Facility Planning and Projects for the Faculty of Medicine, College of Health Sciences. So we deal with end user concerns as a daily activity. It's difficult for people to differentiate the policy process that we're talking about here, and they'll look to anticipate standards. So how does the policy look to address standard development, and how will the standards be determined going forward?
Yeah, thanks. Great question, John. Ashley, I'm going to turn that one over to you.
Yeah, thanks, John. So yeah, and you're right, like we talked in the slide, the policy is really that overarching guidance for space management, so the decision-making authority and principles, whereas the space standards get into the tool we're using for planning purposes, and looking at consistency. So one of the things we know is an issue that we've been asked to address is there is inconsistencies around how the space guidelines might be interpreted. And we know that there's different space guidelines currently for Faculty of Medicine and Dentistry relative to the rest of North Campus. So the policy is not where you'll see the specific typical office size in new buildings or renovated spaces. That will be the next step that we're working on with the space standards. And I mean, you would know too that there's so many outside factors there that influence space standards over time. So pedagogy, workplace practices, technology, evolutions, the space standards have to adapt over time. And we do see this with this changing. And one of the, like we were talking about cleaning out our file room the other day, because it's just the space that you needed for physical files. In our area in particular, 40 years ago is very different from what is needed now. And all that contributes to how we look at space standards evolving over time. So we are really in the beginning stages of that initiative to update space standards and look at where there is inconsistencies, and understanding where we should be moving to, but then also balancing where are there unique considerations or faculty specific needs that are important that we don't lose sight of. And I think one of the things that came up again on Tuesday's town hall that we have heard about is standards in particular for the ratio of grad student workstations. So that's a clear item that we're tracking as part of this space standard update.
Thanks so much for that.
Yeah, thanks for getting us rolling, John and Ashley, for the answer. All right, so we'll just open it up now to all participants. Again, please just use your Zoom hand or type it into the chat. There we are. Ted, please go ahead.
Yeah, good afternoon. Thanks, Todd and Ashley, Marvin, everyone. I've a few questions. I don't know which of my questions are about the policy and which are about the procedure that'll follow, but I'm sure you'll direct me. So I'm a chair in biological sciences. I've heard repeatedly a concept that departments by some mechanism will be charged for the space that they're going to be assigned. I really can't wrap my head around that concept, and I don't know if that's rumor or if maybe you can fill in if that is part of the vision.
Now, I'll let Ashley provide some of the detail on it, Ted. There are different ways to try to manage space. At present, I'm going to get corrected on this part, I'm sure, but I'll just say in quotes, air quotes, all sort of space facility maintenance type costs are actually managed through what the portfolio we would now know as University Services Operations and Finance. So that would be my portfolio. And Verna, you, Provost VP Academic, and myself, as we sponsored the work on the budget model, have chosen at this point to focus on space optimization instead of space charges. Again, there's different models for that to work. So that's a kind of a high overarching level. But Ashley, what would you clarify there for Ted?
No, I think that's my understanding as well, that as it stands right now, the operational costs for space are transferred from what we'd call central finance to what was the legacy facilities and operations to pay for our space use. Other institutions do that different ways. So they might look at having the money flow through the faculties and the faculties charge for space and or administrative portfolios. So at present, I think it's staying the way it currently has been at the U of A. You might, I think, Ted, just because of some of the other conversations that I know we've had is around VPRI is looking at a external entities policy right now, which would consider how do external entities, so spin-off organizations or U of A affiliated organizations operate in U of A space, and at what point do they maybe have a space charge that recovers costs or looks at market rates depending on how advanced the companies are. So that would be, I think, loosely tied to like overall space management, but it would be a separate policy that VPRI would be looking at. Targeting specifically external entities, not U of A faculty, staff, or student space.
Yeah, thanks. That's helpful. Thank you.
Good question, Ted. You said you had multiple questions. We're happy to do that. We'll see if anybody else wants to throw their hand up, but just while others are thinking about that, and I see one there, just give me 1 second. I believe Marvin Washington is on the line with us as well. And so Marvin, I don't feel that you need to add anything at this point unless you'd like to, but Marvin, through this budget model work and some other work is actually the academic co-sponsor on a lot of this activity. And so Marvin, I don't know, maybe just in response to Ted's question in particular, I know you chaired, I believe, the work through budget model. Is there anything you'd like to add?
Did, and if you can hear me, I think what Ashley and Todd said are correct. As part of the budget model, it was an idea, and I think the idea has lingered beyond the sort of current utility of it, right? So there is no plans today, but back when we were floating around different ideas to be part of the budget model, that was one of the ideas. But there's been no conversation going forward. It was just an exploratory thing that we explored and moved on.
Thank you. Yeah, the myth lives on. Thank you.
Yeah, as they do. Thanks, Ted. Feel free if you want to throw your hand back up later on in the queue here, but I'm sorry, I can't tell who that is from the name on the screen, but N. Rayopal, go ahead.
Sorry, it's Nadine.
Oh, hey, Nadine. And maybe just who you are and where you're from in the university.
Oh, I'm an event planner in the global learning team under the current University of Alberta International.
Okay.
So that is related to my question because I mostly came to find out if there are any changes being considered to how we use space for events. We've got the central booking, and then we've got some spaces that are unique to the tenants of the building, and then there's other spaces that are available at a fee. And I kind of have my head around that, but are we anticipating or contemplating any changes to any of that?
Ashley, start with you.
Yeah, Dean, I actually haven't heard any specific requests to see changes to event booking outside of, I believe Dean of Students is looking into some event booking pieces on their side for student-led events. If you have any ideas or suggestions for what you would like to see, if we could streamline anything in the policy suite, or if you're seeing inconsistencies, that would be great feedback for us.
Not particularly, actually. I just wanted to know if there was something. I mean, it's all a bit confusing, but it's part of the job to figure it out. And I don't know that there's any way to make it less confusing. It's a big campus.
Yeah, big place, a lot of moving pieces. I'll just add on there. You mentioned that in some cases you have to pay for space use. Or for certain rooms, I suspect that those are probably our ancillary operations managed through campus services, which is also in the USOF portfolio, and those are areas that get no supported funding from the university, and so they have to sort of pay their own way, carry their own freight, as we like to say, and so that's why we charge for those spaces. Yeah, thank you very much, Nadine. Gonzalo, please.
Yep. Thank you. I just was wondering if you could.
Gonzalo, just who you are and where you're from first.
Oh, sorry. My name is Gonzalo Vilas. I'm the Director of Research and Innovation here at the FOMD. So going back to what, like at the beginning of that conversation, I was wondering if you could, if possible, expand a little bit more on how this policy will affect the third party / spin-off in terms of, duration of the assignment of the space, who's responsible, whether, it's going to be allocated, from above, or it will be depending on where, on departments, that type of thing. Because you probably know, this is a, like a very hot topic, and like any clarity on this would be extremely appreciated. Thank you.
I think some of that work is on the external entities is still in, I think, just still relatively early stages of work. Ashley, you'll have more details, but on specifics to Gonzalo's questions, what I'll just add sort of to the context of it is that we have non-U of A entities. Some of them might be spin-offs, some of them might be people we're sharing research with, some of them might just be agencies that we've allowed to be in our buildings, and we might do that for zero cost. We might recover our costs. We might look to actually use that potentially to make some money for the university. So I think the external entities piece is as much about who do we enter into those arrangements with, and what is the cost for it? Because the university can't afford to just give away space, right? It's a commodity in its own right. But Ashley, what else would you add to the question?
Yeah, and Gonzalo, it's great to see you. I've seen your name on so many emails, but I've never actually put a face to the name. So in a good way. Yeah, so there was, as Todd mentioned, it's early days. There was, as part of a space management interim guidance memo that came out last February, there was some interim guidance on external entities while VPRI is leading that policy. So part of that, the interim guidance was that my team would enter into, like, with faculties for 1 year lease or license agreements, just so that we had something in place, particularly on insurance, just to cover that off. So we've been working away at that. And that also they require faculty dean and college dean approval in order to enter into those agreements to confirm that yes, it is in alignment with the mission, that the work that they're doing as an external entity, and we do want them in our space. And then moving from there, the policy that VPRI is developing, which is being led by Darren Fast's group, will come forward, and transitioning out of those 1 year agreements, everything will become governed under this new policy, which is intended to define different types of external entities, how long they can be here, what are the terms in terms of how the costs might ramp up over time, or depending on how they're categorized. So we've been working pretty closely with Darren's team, and I believe he's in consultations on what that policy could look like. But yes, you're right, it is a very hot topic, especially where space is becoming really constrained.
Yeah, thank you. The reason I was asking this is exactly that, with trying to optimize footprint, and having to deal with the entities that have been like 10, 15 years around, and there's no clarity. I was, again, and like VPRI is working on this, you're working on this, so I wanted to have more information about how these two works will come together to inform us, what can be or cannot be done. But thank you very much for clarifying.
Yeah, no problem. Todd, there is a question in the chat as well. Chris didn't want to that one.
Excellent. Let's go to Jennifer, because I realized I don't have my chat open, and so I said I would monitor it. So Jennifer, let's go to you. Who you are, where you're from, your question, and then we'll come back to Cheryl's question.
Thank you, Todd. So I'm Jennifer Bowser. I'm from the University of Alberta Museum Central Academic Unit. And I want to first thank Ted for asking his question, because that myth has been lingering, and I know it's been at the top of mind of a lot of museum collections staff and curators. My question, though, is, so museum collections, there's 30 registered museum collections on campus, distributed in 18 buildings in about 200 or so locations. So my question is specifically around how and if the policy and procedures will reflect communication methods in terms of building projects and renovations. As it's happened in the past, often we're very late to the awareness campaign of renovation projects, and because museum collections have very specific needs, international standards, federal, provincial legislation that we need to follow, sometimes we get into very sticky situations with projects that negatively impact collections, and that's primarily because we haven't been made aware in enough time to mitigate and plan for these projects and safeguard the collections. So I guess my very long-winded question is, will the policies and procedures, how will the policies and procedures address communication methods in terms of making sure that the users are aware of what's happening in buildings and potential implications, whether it's in the spaces themselves or in adjacent proximal locations?
Thanks, Jennifer. Communication is always such a challenge in any organization. I've been around the university now for 4 years next month, and I find it to be an additionally complex matter here at the university, but is something that I know our teams are thinking about, and we're actually looking at enhancing in many ways how we're communicating out to the organization on new projects, renovation projects, maintenance, emergency maintenance, etc. But Ashley, I'm sure you have some specifics on the procedural side.
Yeah, Jennifer, maybe I'll follow up with you specifically to dive into this one. I don't think we need the policy or procedure to fix that at all. So we can get a handle on this right away and figure out how I know James, who's my counterpart on the operations side, the facility service partners have been really working to communicate to all of those building occupants, but they might not. I'm not sure how quickly and how proactively some of those are going out, and are they going out to museums in addition to some of maybe the primary faculties that would be in certain buildings. So I will follow up with you so that we can get that bigger issue resolved. There is, as part of the overall master planning effort that we're going to be looking at for long-term, like knowing what space needs are and what the plans are to get there. I believe there's a specific one on museums and collections that's planned. So there'd be a more targeted look at what the needs are for museums, given that right now the collections are very spread out, and some of them are not in ideal spaces, especially with some of those aging buildings that we're having some issues with. So Joanne and I can also meet with you about that. She can speak very passionately about master planning.
That's wonderful. And I will say the facility service partners that we've worked with have been really wonderful, and we've made great strides in communication, getting to us in a timely manner. So I do appreciate the efforts that F&O has made towards that.
Well, it's always great to hear those good news stories. Thank you. Cheryl, sorry I missed your question in the chat earlier. Yes, I'll say yes, the work from home activities does factor in. Ashley or somebody on the team can give some specifics, but I'll offer this up. If we're going to get the best use out of our space, where remote work is an option for the area, and that works for the individual and for their leader and the work within that area, and that's an if, right? That has to be approved and decided at the team department level. Then we do need to take a look at in that case, who gets a allocated space within the university's infrastructure, or who gets a touchdown space, for example. So I don't know that we've actually sort of set any particular standards yet within the policy, and again, that gets into the policy versus standards. But for argument's sake, I'll throw out and say, maybe if somebody doesn't work in an office at the university at least 3 days a week, maybe they end up with a touchdown space as opposed to a dedicated office space. But Ashley, did I get that generally correct?
Yeah, so Cheryl, I referred to in answering one of the other questions, there was a space management interim guidance memo that went out in last February to where there is some questions that we were getting asked. One of them was around office spaces where there's a high instance of work from home. So the interim guidance on that was that for new agreements and new growth, that considering shareable offices when it's 2 days in person a week or less, it was the interim guidance. So we haven't actually hard-coded that into standards or policy yet. It's a tool that some of the faculties or departments that are looking at office assignments, they can consider if they are having growth pressures I think there might have been some growth pressures this past September with new staff members coming on board or faculty members. But that one is something that is, part of the consultation that we're considering, and I'm not sure where it would land versus in between the policy and procedures and the work from home arrangement that HRHSE manages.
Thanks, Cheryl. Thanks, Ashley. Jacqueline, who you are, where you're from?
Sure. Hi there, I'm Jacqueline Little. I'm the Director of Research Security in the VPRI. And I have another question, which I think is similar to that others have asked in terms of is it policy, is it procedure or standards? And that is like how best to offer considerations related to physical security into this process. So in my office, we are soon to be responsible for the controlled goods program, as well as the contract security program. And we're also routinely offering advice on physical security considerations to researchers in the context of meeting research security requirements under federal and provincial requirements policy. So just want to be sure that we're injecting at the right moment in terms of whether that goes into, that's thought of in the policy or that's something to be thought of in terms of procedure and standards. Thank you.
Great. Go ahead, Ashley.
Yeah, thanks, Jacqueline. So I think that would be excellent for us to look at even in the principles up front. So if there's any specific language that that your office is looking at that you would like to see in whether it's in the policy or procedures around principles for physical security in alignment with some of those requirements, that would be great feedback if you can send it over to us.
I think great example of a question. There's been a couple of here already this afternoon that are surfacing some things that we need to make sure we're digging into in the consultation. So that's the value behind town hall sessions like this. Thanks, Ted, for your patience. Please go ahead.
Yeah, thanks again, Ted Allison, Biological Sciences. I guess one thing I'm worried is going to fall through the cracks, and I kind of guess it's not this policy, but I'm not sure which policy group I would speak to. And maybe Todd, this is under your umbrella. Is this what F&O is responsible for at the level of the building? And the specific example is emergency backup power. Most academics in my sphere are shocked to learn that they are responsible for providing emergency backup power for their own equipment and experiments. And I think, separately, there's an awareness campaign that needs to happen there, but it's extremely inefficient. I think that is the obvious problem to have hundreds of professors around campus trying to find ways to create backup power. And as I understand it, it's an administrative weirdness where F&O is responsible to the shell of the building and then not responsible for what's happening inside the building. I'm sure it's more complex than that. But I don't know if a space management policy thinks of what needs to be provided to the space, but this is a really odd thing that's happening at U of A and really needs to be addressed.
Well, thanks, Ted. I'll let Ashley maybe speak to some of the specifics there. I'm not sure that it is much more complex in the current state than what you just defined. Now, should it be that way? I think we can have that conversation. But that is, I think, generally speaking, the sort of box that we're in right now. Hey, Ashley?
Yeah, Ted. So it's a great question and it's a big challenge. So what the reason is that the way that Government of Alberta defines capital maintenance and renewal is generally tied to base building systems. So mechanical, ventilation, electrical, like the shell of the building. So that's when you hear talk about, the shell of the building, that's what that is about. And we're so heavily underfunded in the capital maintenance and renewal envelope from the government that the challenge comes that we can barely support the base building, let alone looking at some of the other pieces, which is just the financial reality that we find ourselves in. So I know my counterpart on the operations side, James Allen, is working pretty closely with Jason Acker to try and look at where we can leverage between our capital maintenance money, some of the other research pots that are available, to try to look at some of the priorities that we have. But it is a known issue. And that I think James is working on a document that provides a little bit more clarity. I think it was also in a memo, and what I'm learning is it's really challenging, and if it's not hard coded in something that people could find, sometimes we have guidance that comes out in a memo that it doesn't pass through. People don't know that it's there, and it doesn't. I mean, it doesn't provide a path forward. So it's definitely an issue that we know has to be addressed. And
You know,
sorry,
it's-
I'll his hand go up too, because he's definitely he knows all about this one.
I mean, there's certainly many arguments that could be made, but Tri-Council data security, et cetera. I mean, we need solid protection for the materials we've generated. We have lots of policies that say we need to keep these things for long term, and it's just not really. I guess we're just not really doing that. So it's quite frightening.
Yeah, I think that just to put even a bit of a sharper point on it, it comes down, as many things do, to the funding source and to the money, right? So what we now know is USF. F&O actually doesn't exist as an entity anymore. So back in June, two portfolios were brought together. So University Services Operations and Finance, can do things. But we would have to sort out the funding source for that, right, Ted? So it's great that it's on the table, right? Thanks for surfing it. I think this is a good place to do that, and those are things that we can take away and can continue the conversation on.
I appreciate it.
You bet. Ted, you might have more, so feel free to throw your hand back up in the queue, but we'll go back to Gonzalo.
Yeah, again, like building up on what Ted just said regarding, like what's building, what's not. I think it would be important also to clarify in that regard, for example, mechanical systems that might be considered research but are part of the shell of the building, because, when you consider designing a building for research, embedding that concept are things like fume hoods or like spaces for autoclaves and that stuff. And at the FOMD, we have had like issues when it comes to like whose responsibility is, for example, fixing a cold room that was designed from day one. It was not an addition from a department, or fume hoods that like essentially if you turn the building upside down and you shake it, doesn't fall. So under that definition, it would be in accordance to the policy that says it's F&O or the post F&O organization responsibility. But we have had a lot of pushback saying, no, it's the department or the PI. And I think that, like clarity on that aspect would be important to include.
Great, thanks for that, Gonzalo. And so I think I can see Ashley and others on the team frantically keeping notes as we're talking, so we'll make sure that that's captured. Thank you. Other questions? Elizabeth, who you are and where you're from first, please.
Hi, sorry, waiting for, there we go. I was at the meeting on Tuesday. So I'm Liz Zach. I'm an associate professor in the Department of English and Film Studies. And part of what I asked on Tuesday, I'm going to kind of reiterate today a little bit, partially because Marvin is in the meeting now and wasn't in the meeting on Tuesday. And so one of the concerns I raised on Tuesday was that when I saw the flow chart, regarding where we are in the process of the space management policy, was that it said that we were in the consultation period. And I expressed my shock that we were in the consultation period, because in the Humanities Center, we are in the full-on implementation, post-implementation phase, where all kinds of space management policies have been enacted already, and people have had to move their offices. They have had to give up lots of space. And I know that there's this discourse around being space challenged and some places having too much space and too little space, which is shocking to me, because the policy is supposed to be being made now and not implemented until the spring. So how can we know that we have too much space if you haven't developed the policy? But yet somehow the decision was made that we have too much space. And the upshot of this was primarily impacting our academic teaching staff, who do a huge amount of teaching in the Department of English and Film Studies. And they were told they had to vacate They're offices, often purpose-built offices that were built for one with an exterior window. They have now been put in offices, interior offices with no windows, and they're forced to share. So there's two in an office that was built for one. This makes it really difficult for them to hold office hours. I've heard talk about a touchdown space or a flex space in which the students could book office hours. That doesn't work because we hold an open door policy for office hours where students know they can contact a professor if they come and see them during those office hours. And it puts the onus on students to have to make an appointment. It sets up a hurdle to accessibility. The other issue is that the offices have now been rendered inaccessible. If a student showed up in a wheelchair, they wouldn't be able to get into the office because they're so tightly packed with two people in an office built for one. So this question is, I've already addressed it to Todd and Ashley, so a little bit, Marvin, it might be for you. Why are we at this phase of implementation without the consultation period?
And Marvin, maybe just before I turn it over to you, just because you weren't in the other day, and Liz, please, if I say something here that I didn't say when we spoke the other day, correct me. But just a couple of things I would offer up is, and I believe we talked about this. So collectively, we know as a university that we have, I'll say, I won't say too much space, but I'll say more space per capita than any other U15 in the country. So just as
can I just ask about that? Because I have about 15 questions I would love to ask, and I've really held off this meeting to let other people speak first. But when you come up with that metric, are we talking about like the entire landmass of the university? Because we have a huge ag school with acres and acres of land.
Acres. Yeah,
how could we compare that with like, a campus that is in a downtown? Yeah. at a like in McGill, which is in a very compact space. I don't know where that metric is coming from. And I find it hard to believe that every inch of every U15 university and how much space they have. But
so Liz, sorry, if I can just jump in and let me finish my thought, please. And I'll maybe preface all this by saying, really appreciate your questions, and we are happy to try to answer them here today. As I suggested the other day, I think there would be value in having a one-on-one meeting with yourself, Marvin, Robert, Eva, right? If you have that number of questions. But we actually do know, because U15 universities report on this. I'm not talking about our landmass on acres. I'm talking about our square meters per capita within our infrastructure. And the U of A has the biggest of the U15 in Canada. So it's actually reported. It's not secret, private information. So that was one thing I would just offer. The other thing I think in the context of your initial question is that we have a policy now. So whatever decisions were made in the Humanities Center were made in the context of the needs of that faculty or the desires in that faculty within the construct of the current policy and the current standards. That policy is being reviewed and consulted on for revisions in the new policy. So that's the process that we're in, just to draw that continuum. But Marvin, happy to turn it over to you.
I was getting ready to start with Todd's last sentence, which is that we use the existing policy. And then I think Ashley talked about the interim space memo. I may getting that term wrong, but there was an interim space like memo that was put in place to sort of say, while we're thinking about this review of this, what do we want to do with the policy? We had a guidance. And in that guidance, we did a fair amount of consultation. I was involved in some of them with the department chair back then of English and Film Studies. We had meetings around to sort of talk about sort of the humanities fire that moved people out of humanities. Then how do we then move people back into humanities? So I feel like we did some consultation and we used the existing guidance. Part of this meeting is to say, is there now time to sort of consult on updating the policy going forward? But that was not, we had no policy. We were using an existing policy and procedures and standards and principles and all those words back then. Humanities fire just occurred sort of in between the movement of the creation, another word, not even creation, improvement, if you will, on the existing policy. But happy to chat about this and like talk about like the steps and processes that we did specific to humanities, because it was one that I was somewhat involved in, so I can speak to that one.
Yeah, I mean, I would very much like a meeting with you to talk about how these decisions were made, because half of the building is empty and we're crammed into a small portion of it, which I don't understand how that can be efficient. I'm sorry.
That was an internal decision. Like, we can talk about this
Yeah.
offline, but
Sure.
we offered other options. The internal decision from the English and Film Studies was to do that. So again, we can talk more about this just in one-on-one. Yeah.
Thank you, Liz. Thank you, Marvin. We'll leave that with the two of you then, maybe to organize with Robert and others as need be. Thank you very much. All right, we've got time for one or two more.
A few question from Nadine as well in the chat.
Yeah. Thanks. That's a good one. Then we'll go back to the hands. So in the chat, will there be meetings with more local teams to help identify feedback? If I try to summarize that, Nadine, if I've got that wrong, I think that's generally the gist of it. And Ashley, do you want to just talk a little bit about the consultation plan?
Yeah, so we have there's a policy working group that's been set up that has a number of the reps are actually online that you can see, and then there's going to be specific roundtables around specific content areas that are going to be developed. We're happy to have an individual meeting, Nadine. We aren't, I think it's important to separate some of the standards. So if you're looking at unique areas as it relates to standards, we would want to try to separate that, even though we're happy to take the feedback as part of this earlier consultation around the policy. But yeah, the information on the policy working group members as well as the roundtables is all going to be posted on our website. And you can reach out to us for sure if you want to have a separate specific meeting. I will say there was some discussion at the policy working group on having faculty specific roundtables as opposed to functional roundtables. We had a lot of internal discussion on that. I think what's important is we're also trying to look for where there are similarities and hearing each other across the institution as to some of the challenges that are where they are related to space, as opposed to siloing things out. So it is, I think, really important also that other faculties are hearing from you in business. My hope would be that you would also be participating in a voice at the table when we're doing the roundtables, as opposed to just having separate meetings.
Thanks, Nadine. Thanks, Ashley. I might get the pronunciation wrong, but Pierre was the name on the screen. Yes, there you are. Your hand was up and then down. Please go ahead, who you are and where you're from.
Hello, Ashley, I think first time meeting you. I'm Diane Payer, FGM for AILS. I think Todd and I have met once before, haven't we? Yes. Yeah,
the names in Zoom, I have to admit, the names when they're not full in Zoom throw me a little bit, and the boxes are small. I can't quite see the faces. Yeah, carry on, please.
Okay, thanks. On behalf of my AILS constituency, with the new dean coming in, and having had a very, very successful alumni brunch on the weekend, many alumni asking about the future of the farm, and forgive me, I came in late to this call. I'm curious about communications internally to the university, obviously for my AILS constituents, but I'm curious also for the outward facing communications. People are asking about the longevity of the farm, given the sale of the West 240. My costs have gone up, obviously, from a grain and bedding point of view. Is there going to be a conversation around that specifically? Happy to take it offline if that's your preference. And I think Stan was on this committee. So this is very top of mind for a lot of alum. And this is a farm operation that has been heavily impacted by the sale of the West 240 and what comes next. So I was just wondering what the plan was and if there's going to be a communication strategy to our donors and alum, because they're asking.
And Dan, that might actually, your idea of maybe having a one-on-one with Ashley would be a good idea. That's not policy, but that is a very important item. That's not really space policy. That's a broader long-term development plan, property trust, a number of other things coming into play there, but certainly making sure that that the AILS faculty is properly involved and up to speed. Ashley, maybe we can take that one offline, hey?
Yeah, for sure, Diane. And where the policy would provide clarity is clarity to AILS members, AILS faculty members, on how those decisions will be made and who will be involved in the faculty dean and the college dean. So I know I've had a lot of conversations with Martina. I haven't met your new dean yet. So yeah, maybe if we could take that offline and have a meeting with the new dean, and we're happy to support any messaging that you think is needed to support that community and just awareness on what's happening on South Campus in general. We've done a lot of work with communications, but we can do whatever you need to make sure that you think the support's there. Yeah,
Okay, very much appreciated. Thanks.
no problem.
Just a shout out, I think new Dean of Ales, Ricky Yata, starts on the 1st of October, right? So just next week, Tuesday.
Indeed, yes.
Yes.
Sure.
There's a question from Laura, which would be to just handle here, Todd. So how will space standards be implemented to non-standard older buildings? So this is a great question, Laura. And this is one of the challenge with space standards is we might have seen, we would have seen space standards shift if you're looking at 40 years between the size of, whether it's size of an office or like I was saying earlier, filing cabinets, things like that. And we do see a lot of change management. For example, University Commons is scheduled to open here shortly. So we're now the team's furiously working with all of the people that are moving into University Commons on change management to prepare for those spaces, how those spaces are different. There's a lot more shareability and touchdown spaces in some of those new buildings, aligning with our current space guidelines. There wouldn't be a blanket, if the space standards change, it's automatically we would trigger a renovation. We would look at when we're doing improvements to that space, making sure that things are being done in alignment with the principles and the space, the standards, and in particular, going as far as code, right? We also still have a lot of old buildings that don't meet current code as it relates to things like accessibility. So that's just really when you do a space standard, you're updating in kind of like zoning, actually. If you think about a municipality, they change their zoning and they might change some of the building design requirements. But it's really looking at, from that point in time moving forward, any changes are aligning where they with that new guideline and new standard. So that's really how we look and planning projects. So it would impact things moving forward, and it would provide faculty deans and department chairs with guidance on how their current space maybe fits within those standards. But it wouldn't trigger a renovation of older buildings automatically.
Great, thanks, Ashley. Ted, we're going to give you the last word if it's a short one, the last question, and then we'll wrap it up.
Oh, I saved my longest one for last. Sorry, Todd. I think my concern comes down to a one-size-fits-all policy, and I think that the diversity of uses across the campus is so large that making decisions at the faculty and department level must be really important. And this comes to mind in two ways. The grad student touchdown space issue. In biological sciences, we're deeply concerned about this because our graduate students use the space in a way that it becomes sort of a second home to them. And the notion that the small remuneration we give them for 5 years of being here and hardworking graduate students is a comfortable desk and a spot to put down their coffee mug. The idea that would be taken away is just completely outside of our culture. And but I fully appreciate that there's parts of campus and even parts of our department where that would make sense. So I think that homogeneity would be a problem. And similarly, homogeneous plans where high service space with fume hoods and plumbing for lab benches and things has to be distinct in a different building or in a different floor from low service space where computers can be. It's really not going to work for us. The way biology and life sciences goes now is we work really hard to integrate the lab work with the online work and the in silico work, and work really hard to integrate them. And so physically separate them would just sort of be like criminal, right? So that kind of, I guess, both under the theme of homogeneity of an outcome is not going to get the university where we want to be.
Yeah, thanks, Ted. So thank you for that feedback again. I know that the team is taking notes. Policy versus standards, etc. Right? We tried to set that stage. That comment or that series of comments probably maybe got a bit of a foot in both worlds, but it is not the intention to make everything exactly the same, right? Like we recognize that that is not the case, but we will have standards that would apply, right? Sort of across the board. But again, it is about obviously working with faculties and understanding the needs. And within that set of standards, then, making things appropriate and workable. But thank you, Ted. Ashley, we'll maybe just turn it over to you for next steps, and then we'll wrap up.
Sorry, I got distracted here. Okay. Next steps. So I mentioned we're working on commencing roundtable discussions that are going to inform the first draft. We've got our various policy working group members that are going to be helping lead some of those discussions. As mentioned earlier, we're also doing a What We Heard report to compile all the feedback we received that's going to be posted on the Space Management Policy website. And if you have any comments or questions or other specific things you'd like to consider, we had some great ideas that came out today, please submit them to the email noted above, which is also found on the website. Next slide, please.
Yeah, and I think the next one is just me, right? So we'll just wrap it up then. Thank you on behalf of myself, Ashley, and the team. I appreciate you making some time available. I know carving an hour out of schedules is not an easy thing. Do want to thank everybody for your great feedback. Your questions help us, sort of think about things that we might not be thinking about right now. That's the point of the consultation in the town hall. So greatly appreciated. Your feedback is very important. And the email address that was on the previous slide, if you have further questions or further input that you'd like to provide following today that you think about, don't hesitate to send that in to us as well. With that, we will let you get on with your day, and please do watch for further communication on the space policy review. Thank you.
Very good. Stop recording.
All right. Recordings are all stopped on my end. Just, it looks like